need to be addressed, and this is one of them. So I'll be just assisting Felicity tonight, and I'll be sharing the questions from the audience with Felicity and with the other speakers, and other than that, I'm just here to help. So thank you, Felicity, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Willa. Well, like Willa just said, this event is part of the Fashion Revolution Netherlands. It's an event series, The Past is Still Present, Fashion and Colonialism, organized on the occasion of Fashion Revolution Week 2021. The topic of today is cultural appropriation, a term I bet most of y'all know, especially from the moments where big brands were dragged over the internet, like Dolce & Gabbana. They trivialized Chinese culture for their campaign in 2018. Gucci pulled a sweater with blackface, and more recently when Comme des Garçons used cornrow wigs on white models. And all of these are examples of cultural appropriation. And unfortunately, it happens over and over again. So this is a good time and moment to talk with all our guests about why and how and what it is exactly. So tonight we'll dive into the historic and contemporary dimensions of cultural appropriation of fashion, and we'll explore the boundaries between appropriation and appreciation. And we'll seek for solutions, of course, because that's what we do. Of course, we have guests. It's not me and Willa alone. Sivan Brainard, the founder of Afrique, a fashion brand producing ethical fashion in Rwanda. Yeah, please introduce yourself. I think you're still on mute.
Yes, now I'm not anymore. Hi, my name is Sivan. I founded fashion brand Afrique in 2013, so that's already 8 years ago. And during this time, like my initial reason for starting was to create more equality in this world. But the way I chose was very naive, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. So I'm happy to share those with everyone. Yeah, and I'm very, very grateful to be part of this panel tonight and talk about this topic.
We're very happy you're here, and we'll definitely dive into your story as well and everything you went through with Afrique. We're really curious, and I bet you can, yeah, inspire us and maybe teach us something as well. It's never too late to learn, of course. Then we have Christian Smith, founder director of Inclusi Global, senior executive operating at the nexus of sustainability and supply chains. Hi, Christian, welcome.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks, Felicity. When you say it out loud, it sounds really wordy, doesn't it? That introduction.
It was
like I need to rewrite that. But yeah, really great to be here. As it was said, I work in sustainability, and have been doing this now for about 12 years or so. And I think that it's important to keep on having these conversations about appropriation, about the wider context in which appropriation takes place, and to get to a point where we can speak openly and honestly without pointing fingers, and encouraging a much more mutually beneficial environment where we can all learn from each other.
Well, I'm really excited to hear all your vision and ideas about this topic. Toby Onabolu, if I say that correctly, excuse me if I didn't, creative director and cultural strategist focused on cultural advocacy in relation to Africa and the diaspora. Welcome, Toby.
Hey, yes, that was a really good effort. It's Onabolu, but like that's pretty much perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Felicity. Thank you, Willa, and lovely to be here with everyone as well. Yeah, I think your introduction speaks for itself, but really excited to be here and part of this conversation, because I think, as Christian said, it's really about moving away from pointing fingers and actually how do we move forward. I think Sivan said similar as well. Like, you know, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of trauma, but at the same time, there's a lot of, you know, new ground that we can sort of charter. And so I'm excited to have sort of learn from this conversation and contribute to it as well.
Yeah, same. I'm really excited to learn myself as well. That's how it goes, right? Jasmine, not the last but not least, a fashion and design graduation student at Amphi.
Yes.
Yeah, welcome. Well, introduce yourself.
Thank you. So happy to be here. So yeah, my name is Jasmine. I am a fourth year graduation student at Amphi. And in my graduation project, I use cultures, actually my Asian roots. And yeah, I hope to share some research and information about my approach and how I take the steps to make it, yeah, wonderful and yeah, that people can appreciate the culture.
You,
Instead, yeah. Sorry.
you did a lot of research based on your own heritage as well and what you saw in
Exactly.
the industry, and you've created a method, right? How we can handle the fine line between appropriation and appreciation.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, can wait to hear more about that. So let's start with the conversation. What is cultural appropriation and where is it coming from? The theme of this week is colonialism. Is it something that we can tie back to our history from colonialism? And now it's quiet.
I thought you were going to pick on someone.
Yeah, I was also waiting. So maybe it's good to also share who you want to ask a question to, or if this is a question for everyone. But
this is a question for everyone.
Who wants to jump in?
Yeah,
I'm happy to have
take it away.
Let's have a go. I'm really interested in this topic from the human level, right? So I think to almost understand it a bit better, it's quite helpful to look at how we exist in our actual sort of biology and the way we conduct ourselves on the planet. Now, we don't live in a vacuum, right? So we're constantly seeing other human beings. We're constantly seeing our environment around us, which means we're constantly taking inspiration and sort of influence from what we see and what we have around us. So, you know, even from a nature perspective, you know, Monet's famous painting Nymphaeus is, you know, you could potentially say it's like appropriating nature. He's depicted nature in the way he's done it. Felix Mendelssohn composed a symphony based on the Scottish Highlands, right? So we've constantly taking inspiration from our environment, which means it comes as no surprise that we would take inspiration from or even dare to imitate what we see in the other human beings around us. And I think it's really important to establish that, you know, being influenced by other humans, copying other humans, you know, taking inspiration from other humans is a very normal thing. That's a very, very normal thing because we're constantly engaging with one another. But where it gets messy and where sort of cultural appropriation comes into the picture is, of course, I think, as many people have mentioned before, like power dynamics and power imbalances in the world, right? Yeah. And you know, when you've got, you just cannot take history and even the contemporary out of the conversation. And when you have sort of cultures that have exploited and oppressed other cultures, you know, to the extent where, like in the place like where I am in Nigeria and the West African region and the wider African region and even parts of Asia too, where cultures have been sort of, you know, run into being extinguished, being told that they're barbaric, uncivilized, and things like that, and then sort of jump forward like 200 years later and like, you know, a designer that's selling clothes at $2,000 has now decided that this is now very cool, and that culture will now be used to sort of for capital gain for people in the West, but not the people who are the proprietors of that culture. Then it gets very messy. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the idea of sort of copying one another, being inspired by one another is very human, but because of the world we live in, cultural appropriation now exists as this thing that is very much directly tied to power imbalances because, because of the way the world works. We are not in an equal world at all.
And is it something that can change the moment where the power dynamics are more balanced out?
I think it goes hand in hand. Sorry, Felicity.
Something that, like, whenever the culture gets credit for it, is that where the change is?
I think that's part of the change. I think it's everything is working together. So I think the power imbalances really need to shift, and that sort of is going on sort of side by side with cultural appreciation. But as you sort of spoke about there, the credit in a very sort of like, what does credit look like? You know, credit isn't just like a shout out like, yo, we put the designer on the back of our label, so great. No, it's actual proper remuneration. Like, yes, the fashion industry is a creative industry, it's artistry, but it's also very much part of an aggressive capitalist system. So if we're in this capitalist system, then who's getting the capital? You know, I think that's got to be a question that's got to be answered.
Okay, very interesting. I'm wondering now, what are the effects of cultural appropriation? Does it harm, and in what way does it harm or distort BIPOC cultures?
Should I answer or should
I can, I can make a. I think Toby can do this whole session by himself. Um, I can just listen. But I don't think, I know it's hurtful. It is a hurtful thing. And it's a hurtful thing because, as Toby mentioned, you have the historical aspect that has led us to the point where, and we talk about minorities, as a minority, the things that you hold dear, the things that you find reverent, the pieces of art, the headscarves, the fabrics that mean so much to you and your culture are initially dismissed as barbaric, as uncouth, as not worthy, as primitive, whatever else it might be, only then to be taken from you, turned around, and then sold back to you for a premium. And of course that hurts. And that is and that is a psychological thing that I think minority populations have to deal with on a pretty consistent basis. This idea that you are not worthy enough when it is in your hands, but when it's in the hands of the people with power, then it becomes something of value. And that psychological toll has ramifications. It forces people, or it encourages people to relinquish their own identities, to be always looking to the people who hold the power for approval, to kind of forget their culture, their rich, diverse and wonderful cultures, and almost kind of fall in line to whatever might be popular at the time. So we do have to look at that and think, well, how can we address that, and how can we ensure that we have artists and fashion houses that not just only give the credit, as Toby mentioned, but also understand what they are taking, what it means for the people they took it from, and whether or not actually turning it into a commercial asset is valuable to the people they took it from. All these things that need to take place. So I think, we do have to realize that it's painful.
But how does that play out in fashion then? Because on one hand, I hear something really political. It's something, cultural appropriation based on inequality. Can that change? Is it less of appropriation whenever we have more equality in the world, or does it work in another way?
I want to take this.
Yeah, for Christian.
I think it can, but again, you're trying to ensure that when you're borrowing from another culture, that the people who you're borrowing from are at the table with you, and have a say in how these things are utilized. I think if you take a concrete example of the Indian headscarf, for example, and things that I learned recently, we'll say recently, 5 or 6 years ago, when the Indian headscarf was this massive fashion thing of festivals. So everyone in the festivals wearing Indian headscarves, and the Native American Indians were like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Our headscarves are sacred. We use them in our prayers. We use them in our offerings. There's something that's very, very sacred to us. And so as a Native American, you would want to be brought to the table and be asked, and if it's okay to be used. And you would also want the power of veto to say no. Yeah. Because this is something that cannot be used, because it has a deeper meaning than just the dollar signs.
Yeah, sometimes it's just for the ritual. It's that's the purpose of the
exactly
accessory. Is it but yeah, where do you see the most appropriation in the supply chain for Christian?
Gosh, everywhere.
Or okay.
But I think it's so when you're looking um, at the design aspect of it, I think that's the most visible aspect of appropriation. You're looking at things that are taken from different cultures, turned into prints, whatever it is. That is the most obvious thing to see. But you're also, when you start going down the supply chain, you're looking at the techniques that are used, the motifs that are used, the depths that certain companies will go to prove that they're using the traditional hand loom techniques from an Indian village somewhere in Nepal, whatever it might be. It goes all the way down. And what you have there is the appreciation from an aesthetic and quality standpoint of the making of this product, but you do not have the financial remuneration to go according with that, to go with that. And that's where the power dynamics as well comes in, because the further down the supply chain you go, the more you can use your power to get things that you want. So you see these things happening and manifesting themselves throughout the supply chain, whether it's simply at the design end or whether you're also taking carpets from Morocco and using that for inspiration, or weaving techniques for certain place and you're using that, or kente cloth from Ghana and you're using that. Those are valuable things that are never really remunerated in the way they should be, considering how much we can hold, how much you can charge for them, how much you value those things when you're selling them as in back in the kind of capitalist world.
We also have a question from the audience, which I think would be a good timing to already ask. And I'm not sure if I pronounce your name right, and I do hope I do. Sanaz asked, what is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural hybridity? Is this something, Jasmine, that you could maybe answer? Or someone else? Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I would like to answer that question. So cultural appropriation is actually taking something from a culture that has a traditional meaning and twist it somehow into your own aesthetic most of the time, which you can see in the high fashion industry, which can be very hurtful for the people from actually that specific culture. And cultural hybridity is mixing two different cultures. And you can divide that in like a positive and a negative term. And what I'm trying to do in my graduation year is make it appreciative with a method that I created. So I will tell you more about that later on. But yeah, that's the difference.
But because mixing cultures can be really sensitive.
Yes.
Obviously, that's why we're having this conversation. But when is it appropriation and when is it appreciation?
I think appreciation when you really understand the meaning behind something, like what Christian said, a motive, or like maybe a meaning behind a certain color or color combination. If you use it in a correct way, in, for instance, a garment, because I'm a fashion student, I'm really looking into fashion collections, then people can really appreciate that. Like, oh, you can see like a reference with your culture in something modern, and you can share that with the world. I think that's something so beautiful. I mean sharing cultures is about globalization and connecting people together. So that's what really is beautiful. And appropriation is actually taking something without actually knowing what actually like the term is, or like the traditional meaning and what it means for people, because it's not about just a color, just a motive, or just a character from somebody. It's maybe something more, like
it has a whole history.
Yes, exactly.
And meaning, of course.
Yes.
Something we see a lot in pop culture as well. It's sometimes it feels like every month there is some artist or a celebrity that's appropriating. Christian, maybe this is a question for you too. And maybe you have some examples. Why is this something we see so often in pop culture and celebrity culture?
I don't know if I can tell you why, except for it might be either out of ignorance or a misguided attempt to show your quote unquote appreciation for a particular culture. But I think it's important to, I guess the clearest example of this was Justin Bieber in Dreads the other day. I don't know if anyone saw that. And it's really funny because years ago I would have just like raised my eyebrows and go, what an idiot, and walked away. But it's really important to kind of understand that as a Black person, whether you're male or female, your hair is incredibly significant. I have kind of like a fro at the moment. When people see a fro, there are connotations that come with an afro, whether it's from the Black Power movement or straight out of Africa, whatever it might be, 70s, whatever it might be. It's the same with braids. If your hair is braided, there's a connotation to that. The hair is also political. When you look at the struggles that Black women have with regards to, should I straighten my hair? Should I wear a wig? Should I have braids? Should I grow my hair natural? I mean, all of these things have ramifications because the way you are perceived outside of your culture in a society that might be dominated by non-Black people can be defined by your hair. And so when you as a white person wear dreads, my initial thing, as I said, is, yeah, so what? But what you're doing there is you're taking something that is actually incredibly sacred to Rastafarians. It's again down to religion. It's down to beliefs. It's down to something at that fundamental. But you're able to walk away from that. You could cut off your dreads, walk away, and nothing matters. But if you're Black and you're in the wrong neighborhood and you've got dreads, you're painted with a certain brush. And I think that is what the sensitivity is about. It's not saying don't wear dreads, because frankly, it's yeah, but it's understand what that means. Understand that there is a message behind what you wear. Understand that there are people who have suffered from their dreads. When you look at the history of the locks, they're not even dreadlocks. I mean, they're called dreads because, and there's lots of different reasons why they're called dreads. Because when the Brits saw the Mau Mau, the Mau Mau in Kenya, the hair was matted and they were filled with dread. And so when you have that image of the Brits, of white Brits going into a place, seeing it and being filled with dread, and that's the term we now use, you see how that has kind of come through society. So that level of kind of appropriation from celebrities isn't really is disrespectful, because they're not willing to, also generally not willing to put in the work to understand the impacts, well, the stories behind what they're doing, but then also the impacts that we still have today of people being addressed or being put in pigeonholes because of the type of hairstyle that they have. And just to finish that off, for a very long time, my parents would never, ever let me braid my hair. I always had to comb my hair when I left the house. I mean, I'm from Sierra Leone. My parents are migrants, and how you look as a Black child growing up in London was incredibly important in order to keep you safe, to keep you out of the hands of the police, to make sure that you were presented as a respectable young man, and the politeness and all of that came with it. So there were things that we have had to experience as Black males and black females that white people never have to go through. So I think there's a learning that can be done here as well as to what they mean.
Would it make a difference if artists like Justin Bieber tell the story that comes with the look or with the hair?
I don't think they should tell the story either. I think they should be opening up the space with the power and the influence that they have to get people living this story to tell their stories. It's not Justin Bieber's place to tell a Black man's story.
I have another question for Toby. Now we're talking about pop culture and fashion. It's all because of inspiration, and you see something, we've touched upon it earlier already. But how does this link back? What is your view on this?
So could you just repeat the question? Sorry.
We were talking about pop culture and how an artist can take a look and wear it and what the problem with that is. But what is your perspective on that from when you think about the inspiration and appropriation within the human existence, like you've told earlier?
Well, I think it ties naturally. Like, I think, you know, we look to ourselves, we look to one another on a very base level for survival. Okay, this person's doing that. You know what? Take it back like, you know, like millennia, right? This person knows how to sort of dodge a saber-toothed tiger. I'm going to copy that, right? Take it forward like 20,000 years or whatever, and we're not dodging saber-toothed tigers, but we're trying to live and exist in a beautiful way. That person's got really cool hair. I want that hair. That's normal. That's really normal. But what Chris is saying is it's like, you know, it's a real lack of awareness to go and copy something without sort of understanding it within the context of, you can't wake up, no one is waking up tomorrow and thinking the world is equal. Like it's even if you do live in sort of out of sort of off the grid or whatever, the world is not equal. And so to sort of, you've got to really just be conscious you've got to really be super duper conscious in your actions and sort of, you know, okay, I would love to have sort of locks in my hair, but what does that mean if I have locks in my hair and I'm a white person and I'm a white male? You know, what does that mean? And it's, I think like Christian said, I love what Christian said about, okay, cool, whatever. But at the same time, I'd love to see what you're doing. Like, you know, in a space like the UK, for example, you know, an extraordinary amount of black children are expelled from school because of their hair. Like they just get sent home. They get, and eventually often expelled because of their hair. So is Justin Bieber sort of contributing to like a petition? Is he raising awareness about that petition? Or is he just like, yo, that looks cool, I want it on my head? Mm-hmm. I think it's great. You love it, see it, you love it, want to copy it, but just consider, stop and think for like half a second. And
is it something for you to take and copy?
Yeah, and if you are going to take it, how are you going to cut it?
But this is a question for everyone.
I think Sivan is trying to raise her hand a couple of times, and we've been hearing a lot of the men, which is amazing. But I think also being mindful of female voices. Let's also see if she can answer this.
I don't
question.
see all the screens, so that's why I've sorry, Sivan.
No worries. I think, you know, I haven't spoken yet on the panel, and I feel like I have a lot to. I learn a lot, that's for sure, already in this talk, and I think all of the audience is learning a lot. So I'm very grateful for both Toby and Christian's and Jasmine's insights. Like, so much value is in this conversation, and I've been in this space for a long time.
Yeah, what is your experience with this?
Well, I think I'm really on the other side, right? And I also, you know, I've learned a lot, and I've learned how to center around this, because, you know, what Christian is saying, like, I've been doing those mistakes, right? I have been, when I started Afrique, and again, like I started it really, you know, from a positive and loving and wanting equality place, but also very naive and not knowing all these things, because I didn't experience that inequality firsthand, right? And I didn't experience everything that Black people had to go through, which is just natural because that's the way I look, but also something that I really needed to learn. And so when Christian talks about, you know, I started Afrique with like taking the fabrics from the market and working locally with tailors. So I did really take, you know, parts of culture and appropriated them. And so, you know, I just wanted to take my side of the experience just to show also that I've been on this journey and that I recognize those mistakes. And also I needed people to tell me those. And what I have experienced is that actually, I'm going to bring it up, Willa was the first one to tell me about this really clearly, say like, hey, we need to do some research here and give you some feedback on what actually it is that you're doing. And that was confronting. It was luckily just for a few moments, it was like, hey, but I thought I was doing a good job, you know? And after that, I was able to open up and to say like, hey, yes, oh my God, I know that until we live in a world that is completely equal, I will be constantly confronting with everything that I am or was blind to. And that is not, you know, not to make it, compare it to any of the hardships that other people have been through, due to being a minority, due to skin color, etc. But it is also a hard thing from the white side, in the sense of that, you know, you're confronted with things that, you know, are
Always.
confrontational. And I'm saying that just so that people on, you know, this side of the story can also say like, okay, it might be hard, but we can get through it. And we can just like say like, okay, let me listen. And with that listening, I'm sure I'm still doing a lot of things wrong, but you know, there's so many things that we can do, right? Listening.
Yeah, looking back, that you've started Afrique from appreciation point, but with so many blind spots that it turned into appropriation.
It was appropriation from the start. And you know, there's many different things. There's things that I had to learn. There's also the fact that the conversation is not held so easily, right? It hasn't been people in Rwanda telling me, hey, this is not right. Maybe I was even blind for the people that were telling me. But it was also not, I remember that a lot of the people who were talking about it that wasn't right what I was doing, maybe weren't telling it to me directly, because they, you know, I'm not saying it's their responsibility, but I'm saying, you know, it didn't really happen. So that's where it came through another way. But once we know, like, we can actually do these, make different choices. And yeah, I can tell much more about it, but that's what I felt for now.
Yeah, and what did you do? What different choices did you make to make sure that you did it in the right way?
Many different things. So for one, I stopped, like for other reasons too, but I stopped using the fabrics that came from the local markets. I said, I'm not, sorry?
And why was that?
One of the reasons was that actually we were sued by Flisco, which is a whole different global crazy story, because that God, Christian is laughing, but like
I do think we have to. I think we have to touch on Flisco later in this conversation, but that's a whole nother one. But very much tied to the Netherlands as well, of course. So I think it's a really important one. But let's hold on. Hold that thought for a little bit later.
Yeah, but the other thing is like, really, like, it was not my place, and I'm still the owner of the brand. You know, to use those fabrics. And so what we decided to do was actually co-create the fabrics. I think that's the hybrid form that Jasmine is talking about, is we work together with a Rwandan artist that designed actually this print that I'm wearing, inspired on her cultural heritage, but with a completely new touch and with her inspiration in it. Different colors, and really made something authentic that was really a cross-cultural collaboration. And still, there might be many things that we can do better, but that was a beautiful thing. Another thing we did was we worked with a Nigerian branding agency to redesign our branding, right? What I've noticed is that my network was always very white. So like, you know, the people who came to me to say, hey, we want to work with you, and work with you for little money too, were like white people who were attracted to what I was doing. And I realized I had to consciously make these choices of finding people who I wanted to work with, so that my whole team would be much more inclusive and with different voices from different angles. Yeah, so those are a few things that I did.
Very interesting, very good that you did that and went through all the confrontations to make sure that you do it in the right way. Sorry?
No, I wanted to add one more thing. I think the most important part was that I started really saying like, oh, I want to show this different image of Africa than what we've seen, a different image of Rwanda. Because, you know, in my experience, we only saw the news, the NGOs, and, you know, like all the negative stuff. So I wanted to add some positive. And what I realized in this whole process, that is not my place. It's just, that's not my place. What is my place though, where I can be, is building the bridges, being part of those bridges. And, you know, that's where I realized like, that's what I can do. And I have to do that in a better and better way. But that is our place also as white people in this whole discussion.
For the people that are listening or watching this, you just said that is not my place, but maybe you can explain a bit more why it isn't. With a lot of times, like with a lot of brands, the question is, well, can white people run a fashion brand inspired by Africa in the first place, right? And you
Yeah.
do all of this and you came to this conclusion, it wasn't your place to show a different image. Well, how do you handle this then?
Well, it's a very good question, because it's I'm still running the brand and we're still producing in Rwanda and we're still very much inspired. But so I don't have a clear-cut answer to that. Like, what I know I'm doing is building connections and creating beauty, and also, as good as I can, redistribute the wealth. But the where it's not my place of showing this other image of Africa is like, it's not my story. I have no direct connection. Like, what am I gonna say? That is better than any, everyone on the continent can, and diaspora can tell that better. Like, I should be the last in line to do that.
Felicity, I don't want to break in too much, but we do have a very interactive audience, which I think is awesome.
I wanted to ask you, I see a lot of chats coming in.
Yes. So I'm going to go into some things. I think Jen in Seattle is her name. She's sharing that this conversation is very helpful. She says it gives me words to understand my feelings. So thank you for opening up, Jen. We're trying to weave in some of the other remarks that you made later on in the question. I think Gina, I'm not sure if she's in a call with a student because she refers to that, but she said too eager maybe, but actually I'm very interested to hear more about your appreciation methods to Jasmine. So definitely we'll touch on that. Then there's another question, or actually a remark from Sana, saying that her PhD thesis is about cultural appropriation from the audience perspective. However, globalization and cultural hybridity is something really controversial in this regard. So I don't know if that's a remark or a question hidden in the remark. And then Arya responded to that, and she said, research shows globalization made room for cultural hybridity. In this sense, the rest of the world would not be aware of other cultures if globalization was not around. Curious though, what part makes it controversial? So I think that's, let's start there. And then I think there's some other questions about Flisco from Linamore and some other ones, but let's start on some of the remarks, and specifically the last part from Arya. And
and then we can go on with Jasmine explaining about her method.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So who wants to answer the, in this sense, the rest of the world would not be aware of other cultures if globalization was not around? What part makes it controversial? Who wants to respond to that? Jasmine maybe, or someone else, or Toby? Toby, I think.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think we need to stop thinking that cultural hybridity started like when globalization started. Cultural hybridity has been going on for like ever since the human existed, right? Like, we do not live in vacuums. Okay, yes, now there's a country called Nigeria, and there's a country called India, and there's a country called France, but it's just land, right? People have always been moving and migrating and coming into contact with each other, which means that culture is always in this state of flux. It's always moving, evolving, and changing. What globalization has done has just catalyzed everything, such that if you're sitting in sort of the northern region of Australia, you might have an idea of what is happening in Peru, right? That's what globalization does. It means that like everything is hyper connected, but everyone has always been sort of coming into contact with one another from the beginning of time. Like, that's how we've existed. We move. We're actually migrants as beings. As human beings, we move around all the time. So I think where it gets controversial is back to, I think, some of the initial points that were made around power imbalances, it's, if you're sort of, okay, then on one hand, a designer, like a European designer running to sort of Central Africa, picking a print and saying, love it, gonna make it sort of into like my high fashion collection. That's sort of like the most gross form of cultural appropriation. And then you get some sort of bits in the middle where I think where Christian was saying, like, where the agenda is set by one party, you're at the table, maybe from the sort of the culture that's a little bit more oppressed, but at the table, your rights are very limited, right? Or in the supply chain, there's again a power imbalance where, these big corporate people are sort of dealing with, tailors in the market, and therefore the conversation is very imbalanced. So I think that's where it gets controversial, right? Hybridity hybridity is quite, to an extent, I'd say, is natural synthesis. It's a
Stuck.
You're freezing, Toby. Okay, so we might, in the middle of this really important question,
I know, it was
Felicity,
disappointing.
revert it back to Phil.
Yeah. Maybe one of our other guests can want to touch upon this, have an idea about this, or
Yeah, I'm going to be interrupted by Toby any second.
We'll
But
take a moment now.
but again, I think everything that Toby says is right, and the question here isn't to stop cultures from borrowing and appreciating and learning from each other, because that's happened throughout society. You know, you find Norse objects in in Turkey from when the Norsemen would travel by boat to Turkey. There's all these things that have taken place. I think a really interesting example is kind of the black body, the black female body. If you look way back in the day, I think it was in South Africa. I don't know if you know the Hottentot, the lady with the supremely big backside that was gawped at by men by white men in South Africa and brought back and kind of paraded around as this object, this exotic object with a big backside, because it was amazing, wow. And then if you look at history of how the black body has then been denigrated, as black people have been treated in a myriad of horrible ways, to the point where even black women and black men don't, are lightening their skin, because the power dynamic is such that there is a certain thing that is beautiful, there is a certain thing that is appreciated, and this is what makes things so insidious, because at a certain point, you have someone like Kim Kardashian who comes up, and she has a figure that is very, very similar to the Hottentot lady, the big butt, the small waist, and she then sells that back to black people as a desirable body. To in Brazil, you've got like a massive increase in people doing butt lifts and things like that. And this is a conversation that almost sounds trivial in a way. Oh, it's butt lifts, but people are dying from these things. And the bodies that for so long were treated as second class, as undesirable, as not good enough, are suddenly taken by a white Armenian woman in the US, commercialized, and then sold back to someone else. That is what we're talking about here. It's not that I'm just borrowing a little bit. It's not that. It's the power. It's the money. It's the racism and the capitalism that exists, that supports the structure, that makes it such a really hot topic. And if you start to understand that, then you can start having proper conversations, as Sivan did and continues to do, about how you move forward in a constructive way. But you cannot have that conversation if you're not willing to understand the history. And this goes for the racism, the Black Lives Matters, and all of those things. These are all intertwined with what we're talking about right now. So you have to have that understanding to move forward.
Yeah, so again, it comes down to another culture or white people, but even like let's say another culture taking something that's for instance black people, where it is very natural, and then it all of a sudden it's a trend, while a black woman will be marginalized for it, right?
Simply put, yeah.
You want to say something else about this, or maybe one of the other guests?
Right, pass it on.
I'm wondering if there's a way, well, maybe we can go back to Jasmine now. Like, are there laws? Is there, can we create something to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore? And Jasmine, you've done a lot of research about this, created a whole method. Maybe this is the moment where you can tell us more about that.
Enlighten us.
Yeah.
Yes, so my graduation project is actually about myself. Born and raised in the Netherlands, so what I would say is I'm very Dutch actually, but my roots, my traditional roots, is Chinese. My parents are from Hong Kong, and yeah, for a long time I actually really didn't know like a lot of it, and for some reason I was really curious, like what are the colors meaning? What kind of characters do they have? Because the rich history has like a lot of fabrics and silhouettes and textiles, silks. So that made me dive into the culture. And in my research, I came a lot of aspects that reminded me of elements from my grandmother, and but also in like now you can see a lot of appropriation in the current modern world. For example, the Chinese people, they have on social media, there's like this trend going on. It was called the foxy eye trend, where fashion influencers pull back their eyelids to create this foxy eye. But for me as a Chinese person, it's actually not nice to see that, because when I was a little child, other people like mocking you and kind of bullying you. So to see that as a trend right now, it's just not okay for me. So my research was really about finding and understanding the traditional meaning. And to understand that, I looked into the haute couture of Guo Pai, and as well as Roberto Cavalli. They both used the Chinese culture. And for me in my research, it was important, like, what are the steps they took in the design process, and what can I learn from that? And can I use those steps, or would I approach that differently? So if I can, I would like to share as my screen, or I think, yes.
Yeah, here it is.
Yes, great. So on the left side, you can see Guo Pai. It was at the Met Gala in 2015, where the theme was China. Rihanna is wearing a haute couture dress, and what you can see is it's a really long dress, a cape actually, with a lot of traditional Chinese embroideries that Guo Pai developed, and also you doing a collaboration with the people that actually know the traditional techniques of it. So it's done correctly. The color means royal, rich, high standard. So the total look, it just makes sense. However, on the right side, it was at the same Met Gala. You could see Kim Kardashian wearing a Roberto Cavalli revealing dress. Covered in, I think, Swarovski beads. And you can see in the middle, the traditional character, Chinese character, it's called the Shu, and it means long life. And if you can see closely into Kim Kardashian's dress, it's not even copied correctly. So that's actually a big mistake. And this character is actually holy to Chinese people, and also has to have, in all terms, needs to have a position that is centered and surrounded by flowers or beds. And in this case, it's neither of those two. So if you go on to the next slide, I have my method. It's called the CHO method. I'm actually Dutch, so it stands for cultural hybridity in the design process. And I have 3 phases, or actually 4. So the first one on the left side, you can see culture 1 and culture 2. So if you're a designer like me and you're trying to mix 2 cultures together, you of course want to do that correctly. So you have the Western and the Chinese in my perspective, and then the era of it, because in the 1800s is completely different to the 21st century. I created these topics like the symbols, the colors, the motifs, because that's the most relevant in my culture. So by filling that in and trying to think of what you want to use in your design, you also have to do the research, like what is the actual meaning? Can I mix this with a certain color? Can I not? What kind of elements do I have to think of when I'm using this specific motif or color? So in phase 2, you do the research. Phase 3 is actually creating a toolbox with those elements. So you know the meaning behind it, you know what you can use, what you cannot use. If you mix something, you know exactly like how. Example for the shoe, you have to have like a centered precision, surrounded by flowers. So you know those backstories, which is really important. And with that, a toolbox, you can just go on into the phase 4, and that's actually creating it. So with that, you prevent appropriation and you, make it appreciative by showing like the traditional meanings in the silhouettes.
So this is a guidebook, basically. That
Yes.
if you follow all these steps, you'll be sure to not appropriate, but appreciate the culture.
Yes, exactly. For my design process, it's really helpful.
Yeah, I'm like, wow. I hope this is a method that a lot of design houses and creatives will use. So
I hope, yeah.
sure it will not happen again. I had a question still about Rihanna and Kim Kardashian. What is you explained very well what the difference between this, but can you say that Rihanna did it the right way and Kim Kardashian the wrong way?
Yes, I think so. Even though Rihanna is not Chinese, I think the way she wore it was really well, because she had like really close contact with with Guo Pai, so the Chinese haute couture designer. And she asked Guo Pai, like, how do I need to wear this appropriate? What do I have to do? What kind of accessories do I need to wear? And she was really involved into the look and like the whole Met Gala process. So I think her approach is really well. And there weren't a lot of Chinese designers at that Met Gala. So I think it's so amazing that Guo Pai is now, is acknowledged by other people.
Because at the same time, you'll bring somebody into the space that's dominantly white, probably.
Yeah.
Really horrible breaking in on such an important moment, but I also want to be mindful of that. Toby's in the waiting room, and the only one that can let him in is Jenny, and Jenny was sharing her screen. So therefore I'm breaking in. Sorry for that. We can go back to the methods after Toby's joined us again. Let's see if he's coming in. In the meantime, I'll go to another question or a remark that we had in the meantime. So I think it was Linnemore. Where are you? Linnemore said, how about the role of Flisco and the complicated dynamics of colonial appropriation of batiks methods and then selling it to African countries? But she said, good, this will come up later, but I think this is an important one that we shouldn't skip on. And I think there was another question from Arletta, and Arletta said, is it necessary for fashion brands / designers, etc., to take a clear political role when it comes to cultural appropriation? And if so, how? Maybe that's a good one to start with, as long as we're waiting for Toby, because I don't know if Toby's come in yet, but I think so. Oh, yes, there he is, all the way from Nigeria. Hey, Toby, you're back with us. Great. So should we go back to Jasmine, or should we go in one of the questions? Felicity, you're the boss.
Let's go into one of the questions. Right?
Who wants to answer the question from Arletta? Is it necessary for fashion brands / designers to take a clear political role when it comes to cultural appropriation? And if so, how?
I want to say something about that. I think we live in a time where we more and more realize that a lot of things are wrong with our, capitalistic model and our society, and that we need to wake up to a lot of things. So before, I think fashion brands were not so political. I think now they should be, because I think we have a lot of important information that we should tell. We really have to shift to the other side of away from whether it's child labor or way too low wages or what happened in Rana Plaza or cultural appropriation. Like, we have to take a stand. And I think fashion brands have a very important role to play there, because I think everyone has an important role to play there, but I think fashion brands should do that.
Yeah,
we should hold them accountable. Toby, go ahead.
Welcome back, Toby.
Yeah, sorry to just jump in. I really, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Now you're muted. If you can take it off the mute.
We could hear you, Toby, so you're on mute now, but you can, yes, there you are again.
No.
Now you're muted again.
Frozen.
Okay, awesome, yeah. Okay, I was just saying that I really think that I completely agree with Savannah, and I think the term political is interesting because it's almost just being humane and just being very human about it all. Truthfully, like we just need to make decisions from a place of consciousness and just be aware of the world we live in, and when you're aware of the world that you live in, you have a heightened ability to make decisions from a place of consciousness. And I think, we love using the word political activist and things like that, but I'm quite I more enjoy the use of the language of just being humane, just being quite humane, really.
And if I may add to that as well, not to make excuses, but I also think that as you look for brands and designers to take a stance, there was something that Simon said that's really, really important that you have to look at as well, which is the capitalist system. And I love Yasmin's concept. I love the way you put that together in order to create a framework that can be used to better understand the cultures that you're taking from, and to get it right if you want to do that. But if you add the kind of capitalist layer on top of that, and you add the pressure of a designer or a design team having to produce 16 seasons worth of 16 drops of clothing a year, the time doesn't exist for that. So I would even go a step further to say that it's not just about making a stance on whether you want to or whether you think cultural appropriation is okay or not. I think it's actually a stance on the system itself that is unworkable because people are exhausted. I think consumers are probably exhausted, although not now because they've been at home all the time, from all the choices. But designers themselves are exhausted from having to just constantly churn out, and this is where you get the mistakes, and this is where you get the increased appropriation, because people just want new and different and amazing. And you do these things, even though you might be willing, you might have the knowledge that they're wrong, but you want to save your bacon, you want to save your job, you want to make sure you get that promotion. There's all these kind of internal conflicts that may happen as well.
And that's why people won't speak up, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But what is the right way to implement a method like Jasmine's, and somebody else can answer this question as well? Like, it is political and it should be a humane question within a company. Like, how can we make sure that we stay human and keep it equal? But
can I add to that? Because
sure.
Is that something that brands can do from a wide perspective?
Wide perspective.
Yeah, if a brand has for instance, if it's a wide owned brand, is that something that they can decide whether it's humane or not?
Very good question. I'm having the same one. Anybody?
I think I will try to answer a few sides from my wide perspective. I don't really know if I understand Willa's question, but I think what I did, and I'm a very, very small brand. Let me be clear. And I'm also as a brand trying to do like I see Afrique more as a case study of how can we do it better, and learning at every step. What we decided to do is just bring out one dress with 3 different prints, but actually it's one, you know, it's 3 different colors, but one dress. And we did that because we want to do exactly the opposite of the crazy, you know, the 16 collections, 24 collections a year, the busyness that everyone is in, the pressure that everyone is in. And I think from a white perspective, absolutely what we can do is create companies that are much more healthy, much more humane, where there's much more space for everyone to really ask these questions and come up, also have that conversation. That's something that has been important for me since the beginning, is that also the people that we work with in Rwanda, they have the space, and we created that space to speak up and to say, hey, this is not working for me. This should be improved, whether that is a light somewhere and how, you know, how they can see when it's getting dark, or whether that is, hey, we need more money, or we need to be respected in a different way. That space should be created, and the same is in our international team, and the same should be in every fashion company. But I'm small, so that's one part.
Yeah.
And then the other question, sorry.
Other question. Yeah, I want
No, but
back to that. I think that ties back to what Toby just said, or Christian just said, that not everyone feels that safe, especially in a white-owned company, as a Black person of color to speak up, like, hey, this isn't right, you should do it differently. So you have really good, healthy environment. You created that for your employees, but how can we do that on a bigger level?
well, it's very radical. We have to slow down. I think that's one thing. And be really, really aware that, you know, of those power dynamics, even in a team, right? Even in a team where you have people from different backgrounds, like, know that it is not as easy for some people to speak up as it is for other people. And even in my team in Rwanda, I can see it's very Rwandan people are not as much speaking up as maybe neighboring countries like Congolese or Ugandan people. And this is just stereotyping, but this is what I see in my team, is that the guy who's Congolese, like, he's always, you know, speaking up and making like, you know, pointing out things that are wrong. Whereas the woman that works with us, who is Rwandan, and also doesn't speak, you know, French in order that she can communicate with me directly, she is much more timid. And what I did, for example, is I wanted to have a weekly meeting for everyone to speak up. And, you know, it will take a long time maybe for Diane to also speak up, but, you know, after a year, she will also take her space. And I think
responsibility, of course, to create that space where she can grow into, and that should be the same for everyone in every company, that you create a safe environment.
Yeah. And pay extra attention for the places where, you know, people might not be able to speak up or not there to speak up as easily.
Does this comes down to education still? And that's something that people say a lot when it comes to race issues or inequality and sustainability as well, that the majority of people apparently isn't educated enough about the history and colonial history of all of us.
My answer would be yes, absolutely. Like I learned things in this conversation, right? From Toby, from Christian, from Yasmin. Like there's so much learning and unlearning to do, that wherever we can put it in, you know, whether it's primary school, high school, university, you know, we brands educating, events like these, really, really important. That's my opinion.
Can we go back to a question that was asked before, and I don't want to miss out on it because we only have 20 minutes left.
Let's do the questions.
Yeah, let's go back to the question from Linnemore, because I think this is a topic that I saw some nodding and I saw some people waking up, and I think especially Christian, because he starts smiling again. So I think, Christian, let's go into Flisco, and let me rephrase Linnemore's question. And I'm sure we all have an opinion about this, but let's go into Linnemore's question. She said, how about the role of Flisco a Dutch company, may I mention, a white-owned Dutch company, may I mention, and the complicated dynamics of colonial appropriation of batiks, methods, and then selling to African countries. Well, and she said this will come up later, and later is now. So, Christian, would you like to reply to that, respond to that?
I could, but I think Sivan has a much more kind of richer story to tell on this subject. I am nothing more but an outsider who has an opinion, but I think
As an outsider, what is your opinion then?
I find it's again the kind of Kim Kardashian thing. It's the thing of I accept globalization. I do. It's you know, as Toby pointed out, we travel, we move, we are inspired, we take things from other societies, and we learn, we evolve, we incorporate things, we throw things away. That's what we are. But when it comes to the commercial space, and you've taken the batik is an Indonesian thing. So you took something from Indonesia, colony, you brought it home, you made it yourself, and then now you're selling it to Africans with African prints, and West Africa, I think, or the African market is one of your biggest, consumers. It just completely and utterly blows my mind, because at the same time as that's happened, the traditional markets in Africa, the traditional weaving and cloth making industries in Africa are dying. But because you've got the economies of scale, you've got advertising budget, you've got the Western kind of technology and the power, you're able to sell your product back into Africa as kind of the solution. And that for me kind of stinks of kind of neocolonialism. And on top of that, you then use your legal prowess to ensure that anyone who is doing anything that looks remotely similar to what you're doing is then punished for doing it. And that just shows what I think is wrong with capitalism. And just on that same thing, but if we look at it from the designer's perspective, when you look at Dapper Dan, for example, from Harlem, who took the logos of LVMH and whatever and created these amazing outfits for hip hoppers in the 70s and 80s, was then promptly sued by those companies because they didn't want to be associated with that culture, who then brought those designs back home, shredded them for a while, and then remodeled it, sold it back to Black people again because they wanted their money. And now if you look at the biggest advocates and the biggest supporters of high-end fashion, who is it? It's Kanye West, it's Jay-Z, it's people like that. So it just wraps up the entire industry in such a kind of weird, messed up, neo-colonialist type of way.
Again, it's taking something from a culture and reselling it back to
Yeah.
Thank you, Christian. Sivan, you have your own history with Flisco. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, so when I bought the fabrics on the local market in Rwanda, it turns out, much later, that these are Chinese copies of Flisco. So they come from India or China, brought into East Africa, I think, and we bought them not knowing where they came from. Also on my part, I didn't do the research to find out exactly where they were made. The market is untransparent, but still, there's always work to do. So, and then I got a letter from Flisco saying like, hey, this print that you're using and that print that you're using, they're all copies of Flisco with proof, and you have to take them down immediately. And, for this print, it's been online since April. That means like so many days, meaning you have to pay a fine of 160,000 euros. And that's only for this print. So, imagine what else came up, because like in the end, every week they came with like 4 more prints that were copies of them. So in the end, we had to take down everything on our website because everything was copies. turned out. Really, we had no idea. And then the half of my next collection that I was working on and did a shoot and everything already also had to go out of the door. We had to promise that we weren't going to sell anything of that. And for a year, I was just in terror of what they would do, because they wouldn't even talk to us. They had like lawyers in a very expensive lawyer office in Amsterdam sending us these letters. They wouldn't talk to us. And so over that period, I had some, like, I've had personal effects also. My business partner quit in the end. And so, and I didn't know what to do. So in the end, I decided, you know what?
You build in Rwanda as a direct effect of this, because
Sorry?
The community you've built and you work with in Rwanda as a direct effect of this, they are direct harm.
Absolutely. And we try, but we try to, because I didn't see what was happening really. So we tried to make things with other fabrics, but they weren't the fabrics so they continued working with us for a while until I said also, hey, I can't continue with this. We have to find different things to do, maybe business to business. And that's where we shifted our business in Rwanda to producing for other companies there. Which also has been hard on them, yes. And, and they sat with us through this like dip, after which I decided, let me open a store in Kigali, because there they can't get me. And that was actually a success until COVID. So we had like 2 big dips in the past 2 years. But yeah, so that's where I decided, you know what, I just don't want to have anything to do with Flisco on so many levels. But what I did do is actually, I said, you know what, maybe I can, shine some light in that company and see if I can talk to some people. And I was sitting at the sales office, because that's where they wanted to talk to me. And I was like talking to them about cultural appropriation and all the comments, like, and the critique that they're getting. And they were like, oh, that nonsense. Like, and I was like, at least you should know who your enemies are. And they were not interested. And then I had a breakfast meeting. Sorry?
I think this made it very clear, this response only.
The second response is that I managed to get a breakfast meeting with the CEO of Flisco. And what Flisco is basically now it's an equity company. So it is, they are all focused on doubling, tripling the value of the company within 3 years. They didn't manage. They're already 7-8 years in that company. They're stuck. I talked to the CEO, David Suddens, in Soho House, and he seemed to be kind of open. And, I pointed out to him the things that, like, he could have improved, and he seemed to be open. But in the end, there's nothing that they would change. And they have like tiny things that they change, where they work with artists, either on the continent or in the diaspora. But it's such a superficial level. They really don't understand the depth, and they are not willing to change. So that's what I've seen, firsthand. And I cannot say anything good.
Clearly.
I was just wondering, what does the leadership of Flisco look like? Can you tell us a little bit about the faces that we see in that company?
All white. David Sutton is a 70 plus, white man. And I remember one comment that I got was that, they had a cultural, strategist, maybe something like that. And that was a Mexican woman. So, it's great that there is some diversity, but then it doesn't make sense. And there were so many people who love that I know, that we know. I think Zinzi worked there, Valene worked there. There's many different people who worked there, and they all left because it was just maybe some words, but no actions.
And unfortunately, a Dutch company as well, with a long history of appropriation. I think just to be mindful of time, Felicity, we have 11 minutes left officially.
Do you have another audience?
There's one other audience question, but I also wanted to give you time and space to do a final roundup with all of the amazing speakers. But if we go back, there's one last question. Lina Moore again asked, and she said, and the Mama Bands, women and other Africans who actually use the fabrics as their own African culture. Is there someone who likes to respond to that? Toby?
Yeah, I think that's one of the, I guess, being very much on ground, like seeing the tragic sort of knock-on effect of that, where this sort of presentation of oneself as an African has now sort of, for a lot of people and across the 54 countries, is wearing Dutch wax fabrics, which is so tragic. There's nothing wrong with it. It's, you know, as I said, culture is always in flux, so things are always moving around. And at one point, Italians did not put tomatoes in their food. Now they do, right? So now in this point in history, Africans, we do wear this, but to think of it as the pinnacle of our culture is so tragic. It's so tragic. And I loved, again, what Christian was saying, and I love what Sivan is doing, where it's like, and again, sort of the design I'm wearing here and other people sort of looking back into our cultures, and, you know, these sort of weavers and, you know, loom and production methods and textiles that we were once using that were kind of driven into sort of being extinguished and now sort of coming back into the surface, but it's still bubbling underground. It's still bubbling underground. And you know, for designers to work in that way, they have to sell it at really crazy price, not crazy prices, but at high fashion prices. And, you know, Vlisco materials are cheap. So it's actually affecting our cultural consciousness and our cultural identity, where people are thinking in a way which is not really ours. So I think, yeah, like there's the exploitation, and there's the just sort of gross capitalism, and then there's like actually sort of almost damaging culture, which for me is a very like sensitive point for sure.
Thank you, Toby. That was the last question, right, Willa?
If you couldn't hear me, I was nodding and I said yes. Yes, so I think I didn't miss anything. Oh, well, actually a comment for Jasmine. A very big compliment. She said, I just want to say, Jasmine, hold on, because it just, someone posted another message and there I missed it. Someone basically, said, hi, Jasmine, your research, Luisa, this was Luisa Vittorino, said your research project is so interesting. Are you planning on publishing it, and would it be accessible to the public? I have some ideas about it, but let's let Jasmine answer that first.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really in the beginning state of this method. I think I created this maybe a month ago. So I'm still learning, trying to developing everything. And of course, I'm using it now in my own collection. So I'm really curious what comes out of this. But of course, yeah, I would love to get in touch with you and do an interview. Of course, yes, that will be amazing.
There's another word of appreciation from, and I hope again that I'm pronouncing it right, but I'm really trying. Tan Nguyen. She's saying, hi, Jasmine. I'm an Amphi student currently working on the Garment Magazine editorial minor, and I find your research really interesting. We'd love to have an interview or feature your designs in the magazine. Would you be interested? So maybe, I don't know if you responded to that or to the other one. Yeah, so this was another person. But I think let's see. I don't want to put you too much on the spot, Jasmine, but I think actually there would be a lot of interest from a lot of people to see if we could do another session, maybe on your method in a later stage. So please keep an eye on that and see if we can collaborate in that sense. Of course, we don't want to appropriate anything from you because this is your work. But if you want to use our channels to also spread the word, like you're in this. Live invited to share this really important study you're doing. And then Romee is also sharing something. She says this documentary is really interesting on the history and appropriation versus appreciation, and is reclaiming of African wax print. It's called waxprintfilm.com. So I think that's it for the questions for now. We have 6 minutes left.
Let's to wrap it up.
Yes, let's do that.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. The audience, our guests, Sivan, Jasmine, Toby. Wow, I'm rambling already. And Christian, and of course my wingwoman Willa. Could have done it without you. Thank you for sharing your vision, your experiences regarding cultural appropriation and appreciation in the fashion industry. And for our audience as well, thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope we've inspired you and that you've learned something tonight. This session was part of Fashion Revolution Netherlands event series. The past is still present, fashion and colonialism, organized on the occasion of Fashion Revolution Week 2021. Go over to Instagram, Facebook, websites to see what there are more events this week, right?
There's another one that's going more into the supply chain of fashion, and then there's another one that I will be hosting, moderating on intersectionality, and definitely more stuff coming up as well. And I don't know, but I would love to hear from everyone.
Here are the.
Yes, here are all the dates, and I was just wondering if it would also be maybe nice to ask everyone of the speakers to round up with a final quote on appropriation versus appreciation, and something that you wanted to share or that you learned today. So let's start with Toby, and then go into the next. Then we can round up in 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'll sort of just go back to where I began with, which is again, like, I don't like the idea that, oh, this brand is evil or that person is bad or wicked. It's more like we all copy each other. That's how we exist. I think it's just now is the time in the climate we're in, everyone just needs to kind of take a step back, slow down, and just be conscious in your decision making. And I think we're going to see a lot of big changes if we make decisions consciously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jasmine?
Yeah, actually what Toby said is exactly what was on my mind. Just, be aware of everything, and maybe try my method. That could be really helpful in the design process. So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Sivan?
I'm gonna be a little American here. That's where I'm based, but the dress that we've been making and we've been putting all this love in throughout this whole process, learning all these lessons and bringing them forward. It's gonna go live for 3 days. We're gonna sell it tomorrow is the launch, the pre-launch. So if you would like to see more or buy something that's very conscious, then afrique.com, afriek.com. I'll write it also in the comments, is where you can find it and find more information about how we do things and why, and also, an encouragement of like, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, because that's how we learn, that's how we grow. It's important to stay open to all this information, but I'm sure you all are, because the whole audience is here to learn. And but also dare to go out there and build these bridges with whoever is there around you, because we need each other to create this more equal world.
And is this a Flisco print?
This is our whole new version in organic cotton. So we're also stepping up our sustainability there. Okay. Locally sourced. Yeah.
Christian, what is
Christian? Yeah, where are you? Yes, there he is.
I'm still here, and thank you first of all to Willa and to Felicity for hosting. It's been a really interesting conversation to take part of. Kind of echoing what everyone else has said, we need to kind of move away from this thing of anti-globalization and whatever, because that's way out of the cat's out of the bag, and we can't go back. So this isn't a question about stopping globalization or stopping influence. We've been influencing each other for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The conversation is really, let's understand each other. Let's have, contextual information. Let's open up the conversations to make peace with things that we've done in the past and find ways to move on together as a unit. And let's bring in the marginalized voices into the world in a way where they can benefit from the things that they've created and the things that hold dear, should they wish to do so. And if they don't want to, leave them alone, go find some other inspiration.
I think that's a really, really strong roundup. Thank you so much, Christian. And Felicity, you've thanked everyone, but of course, you also need a big, big thank you, because I think it's a tough topic. There's a lot of things to say. We can only brush on it in 1.5 hours. I think we could probably easily fill 36 hours worth of this topic, because it is so complex and so big and so difficult, but very necessary and very important. And you did an amazing job in helping us understand a little bit more about it today. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining Fashion Revolution. And we hope to see you at the next sessions. And let's be in touch and let's keep sharing these important stories. Thank you so much.
Have a good night, y'all.
Good night.